Sup? It's your boy, White Lightning, coming at you with some literature analysis. Now, you might not think I'm the real OG, but I'm thugnificent. I went to explore for all 3 years, and we gonna be talking about the works of Robert Louis Stevenson. We've got Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and Dr. and Jekyll and Mr. and Hyde. Let's finna get in it. For this, I'm gonna bring out my ladies to come in and talk, and each lady gonna talk about its individual book. So it can be like a monogamous relationship with the ladies in the books.
A man makes a potion that splits his good side from his evils. What could possibly go wrong?
Thanks, wifey.
Kidnapped is about a boy named David Balfour who gets kidnapped and goes on a journey, on an adventure, and then gets shipwrecked and becomes a man.
Get wrecked.
Treasure Island is a pirate ripoff of the Odyssey, where they learn that the real treasure is the friendships they made along the way.
Dope. Thanks, friend. Okay, so now what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be talking about the archetypes in the literature, except in Jekyll and Hyde. So we're gonna be talking about in Treasure Island and Kidnapped. And we're gonna be representing the archetypes with the vegetables, because nothing shows good literature like a healthy colon.
Alan Breck from Kidnapped represents the classic dashing rogue archetype. He is a wanted man who breaks the laws for his own profit, but is charming enough for the audience to fall in love with him. Who doesn't love a guy who writes songs while stabbing people? Davy Balfour is Kidnapped's hero and also the orphan. The book opens with Davy looking for his relatives to live with after his parents have died.
Ebenezer Balfour from Kidnapped is an example of a clearly defined villain. Even his name has a negative connotation. No one in the town likes him for his greed and cruelty, and he tries to kill Davy on multiple occasions. Jim Hawkins represents the explorer. Unlike the hero counterpart, Davy Balfour, Jim wanted to go out on the ship and is killed by curiosity towards its elusive treasure.
Long John Silver in Treasure Island is an example of both the scoundrel and the shapeshifter archetype. Throughout the book, he is always switching sides and double-crossing everybody. Who's the real Long John Silver? The nasty pirate or the beloved cook?
So the Russian formalist Vladimir Prop, in his book, The Morphology of the Folktale, he said that basically all the literature have the same points and plot stuff. So to illustrate this, we have the ladies here talking about Treasure Island and Kidnapped.
So of the 32 main folktale plot points, Treasure Island meets 20 of them.
And Kidnapped meets 19.
That's pretty similar. Thank you, ladies.
Even though Kidnapped and Treasure Island share many of the same basic plot points, they manifest themselves differently in each book to keep readers of the books from getting bored. For example, both books take advantage of the plot point, the villain tricks the hero. In Kidnapped, Ebenezer tricks Davy into going into the lower leads of the ship, where he is knocked unconscious and kidnapped. In Treasure Island, Long John Silver tricks Jim and the crew into trusting him. All the crew respected and even obeyed him. He had a way of talking to each and doing everybody the same particular service. To Jim, he was unhardly kind and always glad to see me in the galley.
Because of the similar archetypes and plot points that make these books so similar, Treasure Island and Kidnapped are basically the same book. To illustrate this, I'm going to bring out the ladies. For example, here we have the ladies on my right that are both Filipino and a little bit Irish. So they basically the same person, while we have the real normal white one over here that is completely different. Here's the thing. Stevenson's novels were targeted at young boys, like my alter ego, Mike Anderson. So they were all coming-of-age stories. In fact, they're really pretty similar, about a boy going on an adventure on a boat and becoming a man, sort of like going out on the streets on your own. That's why these two books are so similar. All this talk of veggies is making me hungry. I'm gonna be a cannibal and eat one of these here crackers.
Mr. Lightning, you only talked about 2 of the books. What about the other one?
I'm glad you asked. Now we're gonna be talking about The Strange Case Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
As we've discussed before, Treasure Island and Kidnapped clearly follow Stevenson's award-winning model, but Jekyll and Hyde seems to break it. There's no adventure, no boats, no young boys either. The narrator is a middle-aged lawyer with a logical and observant style, much different from our lively Davy and Jim. So, what gives? Why mess with a formula that ain't broke? Well, just like what happened with Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, Stevenson had a dream. A nightmare, to be exact, of a brilliant scientist transforming himself into a wretched fiend, and the polarization of the two sides startling him awake. He was so inspired that he immediately started drafting the novel that we know as Jekyll and Hyde. But dreams don't come out of nowhere. They're built up from your subconscious and memories. All of his life, Stevenson was obsessed with the idea of duality of man. He just didn't know it yet.
After his encounter with the prostitute, he began courting Fanny Osborne. He traveled back and forth from Scotland and the U.S. to court her. He then married her, but she was 10 years his elder. His first 3 years of marriage was spent sick in bed, and he was exiled as an invalid. Stevenson was the bohemian child of conventional parents. He lived in the lowlands of Scotland as an invalid and an exile. He was always living the double life. Makes sense for the idea of duality to dominate his writings.
Most of the duality arose from the conflicts with his father over his lifestyle. His dad had a prim face and was stoic and organized and very traditional. But Robert Louis Stevenson was the opposite. The idea that these conflicts inspired the dual tensions in Jekyll and Hyde is reinforced by many critics who describe the Jekyll and Hyde relationship as father and son instead of polar opposites.
Although Stevenson didn't discover his passion for the subject of duality of man until later into his writing career, his first book being published 10 years prior, the idea is still woven into his earlier works of Treasure Island and Kidnapped.
While aboard the ship set for America, Davy would observe his fellow shipmates and note, no class of man is altogether bad, but each has its own faults and virtues, and these shipmates of mine were no exception. Once Captain Smollett gets word of he says to his face, "You're either my ship's cook, and then you were treated handsome, or Captain Silver, a common mutineer and pirate, and then you can go hang."
Stevenson goes on to further state his thesis in Jekyll and Hyde, where he says, quote, that man is not truly one, but truly two, unquote, and that Jekyll is troubled by, quote, those provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature, unquote, and so he determines to rid himself of his baser desires.
So look, Jekyll and Hyde are very different people, even though they occupy the same body. See, Jekyll is very tall and handsome according to the book, and we like those kind of people. He's a churchgoer, he gives generously. Hyde's a lot different, though. He's small, he got his ugly little noodle legs, he goes around murders people all the frickin' time, too. Okay? He also is impulsive and animalistic, which is bad things. So Jekyll creates a potion to separate the two. And the real question is, what's he separating? Is he separating the good and the evil? Or is he separating the primitive versus the evolved side, with, of course, Hyde being the primitive and Jekyll being the evolved side? And so there's not a clear-cut line of what he's separating.
Jekyll or Hyde? Can you see the difference?
Good and evil are typically at odds in any story of any kind, and this book's not that different. We have the good Dr. Jekyll, the handsome guy, and the ugly little Mr. Hyde, and they going at it all the time. Even though they're not fighting directly, Hyde's being all murderous and running over people and beating them to death. But the thing is the lines of good and evil start to get a little bit blurred. See, how can I put this? Hyde, when he beats the person to death, the guy comes over and goes, you need to give them money for beating them, all that little girl, and running her over. And he goes, okay, sure. So he goes over and he gets some Jekyll's money, and then he uses and signs a check and gives it to them. And they're like, look, it's a check. And they're like, nah, but it works. So the thing is, though, if he's using Jekyll's money to finance his own problems, he's kind of taken over the good side of it. He's getting after something like Jekyll would normally use that money and say give to the church or the people who need it. But instead, Hyde uses it to finance his animalistic escapades. Sorry, said that wrong. The other thing that's important to notice here is that Jekyll's not entirely good either. because he kind of allows himself to make room for Hyde and for himself to become Hyde. First, of course, by making the potion, but also in the future. He leaves little things behind, tells his secretary, well, it wasn't his secretary, the lady that works in his house, you know, if you see Hyde, let him in. He's a friend of mine. Because he's trying to let Hyde do his thing. And that's bad, because Hyde is bad. And so if Jekyll is allowing the bad guy to do his badness, then Jekyll can't be entirely good either. Which is sort of why it may not entirely be that Jekyll and Hyde represents opposites of good and bad, but perhaps something else. To help me out, I'm going to have my girl, Mocha Thunder.
My name is Mocha Thunder, and I am coming here to you from the year 1887, which is the year that the book Jekyll and Hyde was written. And I'm going to talk about the alternative theory about this book, that it's not actually good versus evil, that's actually the primitive carnal versus the very controlled. That when Dr. Jekyll creates his potion isn't actually to divide the two sets of your personality, which is good and evil. He actually did it to strip away that mask he wears in public, to show himself as an upstanding citizen, and he just gives right into his natural impulses. One of the main backings that critics have behind this theory is the fact that Mr. Hyde actually does understand the moral laws and codes of society. He understands that it is bad to kill people, yet he does it for the fun of it. When Dr. Jekyll keeps becoming Mr. Hyde, because one of the reasons is it's really stiffening and hard to be this upright person in society. So when he becomes Mr. Hyde, he does not have to care about what other people think. He can kill people for fun, he can swear at them, he can hit them with canes, he can go with any of his impulses because he does not care. He understands the laws, but he just disregards them. So when Dr. Jekyll gives into Mr. Hyde, it's very freeing. That's one of the reasons why this theory also holds true.
Thanks, Mocha Thunder. Little side note, I'm the reason his lips are all smuckered up like that. So why does it matter, though? Well, let me tell you, for the duality of man that Stevenson originally opens up with in his books, but then further expands upon in his masterpiece, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, he deals with the duality of man a lot, which has come up in other phenomenon in the popular culture as well. Take my homie Batman, for example. He has a quote, "We are all two people, one in daylight, and then one we keep in the shadow." My man Bruce Wayne said that. Because on one hand, you've got billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne hooking up with all the ladies and buying the cars. But then in the nighttime, he beats up all the criminals to a pulp with his bare hands, in the words of fellow black man Lucius Fox. That's the one thing that we got going for Batman. Another example is in Fight Club with the narrator and Tyler Durden, how the narrator just wants to have his IKEA furniture and nice apartment, whereas Tyler Durden tries to be hooking up with the hoes in his weird home and then make soap and then beat people up and blow up the buildings. The final example is Smeagol and Gollum in Lord of the Rings, because on one hand, he doesn't want Master to have the precious, because it's his. After all, he killed Deagle for it. But on the other hand, he's actually a mouse hobbitses, so he doesn't want it. It's another good example of the duality of man, though because he was a hobbit and not a man, this doesn't really count. Anyway, thanks for watching Thug Nose. It's important that you end with the rhetorical question, so I'm going to pose it to you right now. The thing is it really good and evil? Is it father-son, or evolve, or primitive? I don't know. But this week's episode was sponsored by Drake's new album, Views from the Six. Pick it up at any local retailer or download it off the internet illegally like a true thug. But until then, stay thugnificent. This is White Lightning. I'm out.